What is going on, everyone? This is Ryan with Automatic Comics. I thought I would do a video where I revisit the books that I talked about in that prior video about potential ways that you can find some deals out there. And this is with the ComicLink auction that's going on right now. And one of the things that I often see is, especially with ComicLink, because their auctions tend to be a little bit larger. And so you often have a lot of duplicates of the same books. So when you have those duplicates of the same book, sometimes what it can do is it can dilute the buyer pool. So if you have similar books, similar grades, you only have so many people maybe that are watching that auction at any given time. First person gets their book. Now there's less people to bid on the subsequent book. Doesn't always work out that way, but sometimes it does. And sometimes you can find some good prices. Now, with this one, I was specifically talking about some big Silver Age keys, but it doesn't just apply here. I see this even more so with things like Amazing Spider-Man 300, Secret Wars 8, X-Men 266. A lot of those bronze, copper age keys, you can have multiples of the same book, same grades or similar grades, and you can potentially find some deals out there. But let's get into this. We're starting off with the Amazing Fantasy 15. There were two that were selling back to back, a 4.5 and a 3.5. So we're going to start with a 4.5 here. You can see it sold for $37,500. This was a solid looking copy. No Marvel chipping to speak of. Pretty clean colors, or pretty clean book in general. Nice colors, all of that. And this one I had going for $36,000. And this is what I talked about in that video. I said $36,000, maybe a little stronger. Went for $37,500. So 4% over my estimate, pretty much right in line with what I would have expected for an Amazing Fantasy 15 4.5 that looks this nice. So no real deal to be had here, but a solid book that went for what I felt would be around the current market price. Now let's look at the 3.5. Now the 3.5, again, no Marvel chipping. It did have this going on in the upper left corner. So that could be a visual deterrent for it. Maybe something that could hurt the sales price a little bit. But again, really solid colors, that, limited or no Marvel chipping, just that piece missing out of the upper left. Now, this one went for $27,057. I thought it would go for $26,000 to $28,000. So pretty much right on the money there with that one as well, right at the halfway point between what my estimate was in that prior video. So again, no big deals or anything like that with these two. Both of them really went for right about what I would have expected them to go for. But hey, not saying that this works every time, but it is just something that you can keep an eye out for, or you may potentially find a deal on a book out there, and even works potentially on some of these big keys. All right, let's move on to the next book. So the next books that we had two of was Daredevil #1. Now there was an unsigned copy. You can see here a 6.5 and a signed copy, a 6.0. Let's start with the 6.5. 6.5 sold for $4,500. Solid looking book. I mean, a little bit of yellowing to the cover, but I feel like this one always just kind of looks like that. Almost, I don't even know if like a super white even exists unless it's somebody that's kind of tampered with the book a little bit. But for the 6.5, I had this one going for $5,000. So I went for $4,500. So $500 under my estimate, 10% discount on what I think the current market value is for this book. And especially given the Daredevil Born Again series that's coming up, feels like a pretty good price. Off-white to white pages, nice page quality. Now, I do want to caveat that I am still very hesitant with anything that is non-golden age, like silver, bronze, copper. I have been talking about that, where I'm still concerned that the prices could continue to trend down. So just something to be aware of. That is my personal take on it. It is a book-to-book case where if you see the prices have come back down around 2020 prices, the risk is probably pretty low, but if they're still fairly elevated from those, you are definitely, in my opinion, taking a risk with that book. But 6.5 looks like it went for about 10% under my estimate. Maybe somebody picked up a deal on this one. Maybe a contributing factor was that you had two going back to back. All right, now the next one, 6.0. Again, has that similar look. It's got like that little bit of yellowing to the cover. Signed by Stan Lee. This one, lower grade, but sold for more. That signature really does add something. I think it's the same page quality too. Yep, off-white to white pages. So same page quality. Signature, half a grade lower, sold for $950 more. This one I had estimated it would go for $5,300 to $5,500. So another one that was right in line. So right where I was expecting this book to sell. No surprises here, but this is one of those examples where you can really see like this is what a signature can add. You have a half grade lower and it sold for about 20% more. And I really do see that mostly with Stanley signatures. There are some other signatures that can add some significant value, but Stanley by far is the biggest one, and especially when it's on big keys like this. Other signatures that can definitely add some pretty significant value are like Todd McFarlane. Todd McFarlane, I mean, when you have his signature, especially combined with Stan Lee on some of the Spider-Man stuff, really can be a pretty significant jump in value for those books. All right. So those are the first two. Now we're going to move on to Fantastic Four #1. We had two back-to-back books with this one. So we had a 7.0, I mean, a very nice grade for this book, and a 4.5. Now for the 7.0, I had this one going for $40,000. It went for $50,009. There's a couple things I want to talk about with this one. So the first thing, we're going to look up Fantastic Four #1. This is GPA or GP analysis, one of the pricing tools that I like to use when I'm looking at prices for comics. So with Fantastic Four #1, the last recorded sale in GPA was $70,000. I talked about that in that prior video. This felt very high to me. Last recorded sale for a 6.5, $29,000. So you had this huge gap in price, almost $50,000 from a 6.5 to a 7.5. I felt like this price here was very high, and that it just, to me, I would not have been surprised if it took a significant drop down. I know 40,000 was probably reaching, so you know, went for 50. Now, the other thing I do want to point out, and someone else that I was talking to mentioned this one to me, and this is part of that challenge with ComicLink sales. If you don't see that sale happen, or you aren't actively checking all of their auction history that they store on their site, which is not easy to really go through, you won't know about these sales. And there was a Fantastic Four #1 here that you can see that sold in December, on December 4th, for $49,777. So this one obviously is not in GPA. GPA does not pull these in. Go Collect does not pull these in. Generally, the price consolidation sites do not have the ComicLink sales data. So $50,000 sale there. This one sold for basically the exact same price, just, you know, within a few dollars, 50,000 again. So went for the same price as it did about a month ago, 2 months ago. But I still think this one could potentially fall a little further. Going from a 6.5 to a 7.0, that's a $20,000 jump. And then going from a 7 to a 7.5, $28,000 jump. It's not unreasonable. Maybe this is kind of a stabilized price for this book. But let's take a look just at the 7.0 real quick. What was this before the comic boom? So prior to the comic boom, this book, 40,000, 38, 28. In 2017, kind of like 25, 27, 28. So prior to the comic boom, probably around a $30,000 to $35,000 book. So still being at 50, you know, about 50% above those prices makes me nervous. That's all I'll say. Is it makes me a little bit nervous with that book. And so I could potentially see that one dropping some more. Now let's take a look at the 4.5. 4.5, again, a solid looking copy, a little more kind of like muted colors, just kind of like a little dingier look than the 7.0, but that's generally what you would expect. This one I had going for $18,500. You see here, sold for $18,560. So another one almost right on the money there on what this book would go for. So no big surprises with Fantastic Four #1 in the 4.5. Now, the last set of books that we looked at were X-Men #1. So let's take a look at X-Men #1. Got to scroll down a little bit. Pardon the scrolling. And we get to X-Men #1. We had 2 copies. We had a 6.5 that I just said was a beautiful copy, one that I would happily own. And then because it's got, it's got this green corner box up here, I said, just to me, it makes it look like the colors just pop a lot more. And then we had the 4.0 here with the light green corner box. Now let's talk about 6.5. 6.5, I had this one going for $20,000 to $22,000. You see here it went for $18,011. So quite a bit below, 14% below my estimate. Was this a contributing factor, having 2 of them sell back to back? Possibly. The other thing with X-Men #1 is it still is fairly elevated compared to its prior prices. So again, if we jump over to GPA, we look at a 6.5 and we see the 6.5 right here. And you look at prior to the comic boom, 2020. So it would have been early 2020, getting late here. This is where it starts. So 11, 10, 14, going to 29. Let's look at 2019. You can see in 2019, 13, 11, 11, 11, 13, 12. So it's prior to the comic boom, it's kind of a $12,000 to $13,000 book. Now going at around $18,000 to $20,000. It's 50% up. Again, that's what I've talked about. Like that makes me a little bit nervous with any silver, bronze, copper type book, modern, whatever type book that is still that elevated, makes me a little bit nervous. So yes, it went for 14% below what I felt the current market value is for it. So somebody to me got a good deal, especially for a great looking book on current prices. But that doesn't mean that I don't think this book could continue to trend down. Then we'll take a look at the 4.0 here. We've got the 4.0. And again, a solid looking book, but does have that lighter green corner box that I personally don't like quite as much. I had this one going for $8,000 to $8,500, went for $7,550. So if you take the midpoint of my estimate, this is about 8% below, not too far off, a little bit low. Let's take a look at the 4.0 to see what the pricing history is for the 4.0. So the 4.0 here, you can see this last sale here, $9,599. Let's take a look at the pre-comic boom prices. This one was going for, let's say, around $6,500 in 2020. And then in 2019, going around $5,500, $5,500 to $6,000. So right now, this one going for $7,550, not too elevated, about $1,000, about 15%. So at the 4.0 price point, and again, this is the type of thing where you'll see a 4.0 come up for sale a lot more than a 6.5. So it has a better chance to correct, just more sales that have happened. The 4.0 pricing seems a little less risky. It's maybe about 15% higher than what I would say the pricing was prior to the comic boom. Your downside risk is a lot lower. Whereas with the 6.5, yeah, it's a nicer looking book, but it does feel like the downside risk is a little bit higher. Now, just to add a little bit of additional information to this video, I did mention earlier how this doesn't just apply to Silver Age, big expensive keys like that. It also applies to copper, bronze, modern, and actually more so in those. And so here's just an example with Amazing Spider-Man 300. You can see here we had a 9.8 sold for $2,311, ended at 8:25 p.m. on 1/20/2025. Then you had a 9.8 signed copy, went for $2,677. This was signed by McFarlane on the interior, sold 40 seconds later. You can see here, 8:25, 8:25, 40. That McFarlane signature added maybe $350. Pretty solid for that, especially because that's on the interior, not one that you can actually see on the outside. Then we go down. Here's a 9.6 that sold 40 seconds later for $900. Then we had another 9.8 that sold later that night. So it sold about 3 hours later for $2,110. White pages, white pages, white pages. So no difference there. You can see this one that came up for sale first sold for $200 more than the one that came up a few hours later. This one, this 9.6 here. Now this one is white pages versus off-white, but sold for off-white to white, sold for $230 less in the 9.6 range. So this is a case where you can see, like, if you had been watching all of these all sold on the exact same day. You could have picked up this 9.8 for $200 less than this 9.8. You save yourself $200. Both of them are 9.8s. Both of them are white pages. With the 9.6, if you're willing to accept off-white to white versus white, you could have saved yourself, $900 versus $670, $230. That's like 30%. That is a huge savings. If and honestly, like, I know this one's off-white to white, but the colors look better. The colors are darker on that 9.6, I feel like, than this 9.6. It's close, but I do think the colors are a little bit darker, and I like the darker reds on this one. But just something I want to point out there, that it isn't necessarily just those big keys. It also applies here with other books like Amazing Spider-Man 300, that you will see these come up for sale quite a bit. But hopefully you enjoyed this video. If you did, please hit that like button, subscribe button, notification bell, and I will see you on the next one.